Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, folks. This is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast on the Artist Index, and more specifically, the South Coast Artist Index. We are really burning up the atmosphere, so to speak. We're closing in on 200 podcasts. And I'm going to let this guest introduce themselves and, as per usual, spell their names, and we'll let the hilarity begin. Yes?
Hi, I'm Taylor Hickey. That's TaylorHickey.
And I'm sorry, I come from that generation who instantly thinks M-O-U-S-E.
Yep.
Because it was like Mickey
I've
Mouse, right?
heard that.
So tell me any funny things with your name. I mean, people have called me Rob. Of course, it's because of my sinuses. I don't enunciate well enough. And they've even butchered my last name. How about you?
Sometimes with my first name over the phone, I'll get Kayla, especially with Massachusetts folk, because there's like that R that gets added and dropped at random. So
we don't add any R's.
Kayla, Kaylee, stuff like that. Well, you add the R's where they're not supposed to be. So it could be like Tina or Hannah or Taylor. Anyway, I have people ask me sometimes with the last name Hickey also, if I ever got picked on in school because of that. And I always told them, I think I've had way more people ask me that question than have actually ever made fun of me about it. So I guess that's good.
That have actually ever picked on you, right?
Yeah.
The only other Hickey I know of was Chas, which is short for Charles, an old-fashioned abbreviation for Charles, but he goes by Chas. And he was the previous owner of the Four Corners Gallery, or the Gallery at Four, I'm sorry, in Tiverton, Rhode Island. So there aren't that many Hickeys around.
Yeah, I've only met a couple ever. We run into them every now and then, but I don't think it's super common.
Yeah. So you're from Southeast Texas.
Yes. I'm from a town called Orange, Texas, like the fruit. Mm-hmm. And it's near the Gulf of Mexico, about a 45-minute drive from the Gulf. And it's right on the Texas-Louisiana state line, just on the Texas side.
Okay. Galveston, Brownsville. How far is it from there?
About 2 hours.
2 hours? Okay, so it's not all that far off. And there's Galveston, Brownsville, and why is the word captain popping in my head? There's an island, and I'm just blanking out completely on that island's name now.
There's like Corpus Christi further west, but there's Galveston, and Houston is just north of Galveston. If you were to take Interstate 10 from Houston east, it would be the last stop on I-10 is my hometown.
Yeah, my stepfather used to fish out of Galveston, Brownsville on swordfish boats. So So what brought you up here?
Grad school, actually. I went to undergrad for a BA in visual arts and drawing and printmaking in Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, at McNeese State University. I graduated from there in 2014, and then graduated high school in 2014, graduated from McNeese in 2018. And then I really wanted to go to grad school right away. I really had my heart set on it, just to continue studying studio art and printmaking. And I had a list of schools that I was looking into. I narrowed it down to about 6, and I wound up settling on UMass Dartmouth and getting into it. And So I moved up here in August of 2018.
What made you select UMass Dartmouth?
I really liked the Star Store campus. The facilities were really nice, especially for printmaking. There are 3 whole studios with lots of equipment, presses, large etching and relief presses, and there's all these windows and natural light, and it seemed like a good program for me, because I was never super interested in paying like huge bucks to go to some hub like RISD or Mass Art, although I'm not, saying anything bad about them. I feel like it can be easy to get lost in such a large program that goes through so many students. And the university that I went to for undergrad was smaller. It was a 4-year university, smaller than UMass Dartmouth. And I just felt like really seen there. I, was on a first name basis with everyone in the art department, and I really enjoyed that sense of community and, getting that sort of personalized experience. And I felt like UMass kind of had that that sense of community from what I could see coming in. And yeah.
I remember speaking with you at the New Bedford Art Museum. There was an exhibit of primarily women's work, female artists, for lack of a better term, because right now the terminology is like all over the place. And I remember being a little having a jaw drop, because there's this thing about UMass, which when I went to school there in the prehistoric days, back in, between 71 and 75, 1971 and 75, there was this thing, and that thing just seems to still be there. And it was about the hand. It's something about the hand and the eye. You could, it's not so much a style as I don't really know how to wrap my head around that, but it was so evident in the work, whether it was prints or whether it was drawings. And you said something, and can you remember what you said about that?
Yeah. So we were talking about the Emerging Figures exhibition, and I was really lucky to be able to coordinate and curate that exhibition. And it's all young, local figurative artists, and most of them I knew from UMass. So you definitely see something there. And it's kind of like you said, I'm not exactly sure what it is. Maybe not so much a style, but I don't know.
Can we call it soul?
Yeah, I think
is that
it's
a
like
weird
a certain
term for that?
approach or attitude, or
Yeah.
there's a certain emotion there. And I think part of that might be because there's this longstanding tradition here of like finding a balance between the conceptual and the physical. There's still the sort of more traditional sense of art making, making things with your hands, and these things can be very meaningful and evocative, but it's not purely about abstract concepts. There's sort of this blend of physicality and spirituality, I guess you could say. Or
yeah it really still exists to this day. I saw Tony Maraglia at an opening at the Colo Colo Gallery. It was Will Wolf's work. I believe it's still up as of this date. We're recording this on Wednesday, May 24th, 2023, for those people way off in the future. And we were discussing this thing and he felt it there as well. And it's funny because I was on a student selection committee when he was a faculty applicant, and I never forgot his work or him. So we really started going on, and things have changed, unfortunately, because colleges and universities are no longer in the field of education. Their primary objective is to sell seats. And I'll probably catch some flack for that, but at one time I was in administration, and that's exactly what we had to do. You had to fill seats. What are some of the greatest experiences that you had in your BA level and your MFA level?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah. And
well, to
can
start
you
off,
contrast and compare? How's that?
yeah. So first off, I want to say I do appreciate you saying that. I understand that institutions and universities, they need funding, they need, to have income to continue. But I think ideally the priority should be education. It should be the students. And, I firmly believe that. I had some really, really fantastic experiences. Like I said, I really felt a sense of community, both at McNeese for my undergrad and at UMass Dartmouth for grad school. I really liked going to gallery receptions, both places. I've always been really into seeing exhibitions and talking with the artists and the curators, and it's sort of like a critique, but not so formal. And there's more of like a celebratory air to it, I think. And it's just nice to see everyone's work all lit up and everyone's there and happy, mingling. In undergrad, I had this professor, Larry Shue, who a lot of times after the senior exhibition, essentially like the BEFA show or the BA show, he would get the band together. So this meant like bringing in instruments, drum set, like guitars and amplifiers. And then after that exhibition reception, we would all gather in one of the studios, whether it was a printmaking studio, drawing studio, and the band would have different members every year, a different name every year. One year we were the Uncommon Loons. Another time I think it was the Couillon Bayons, some Cajun French sort of phrase. But that was always a really fun experience because we were all just like together having fun and making music, and it wasn't like for anything specific, but it was just a really great time to be together and have fun.
It caused a sense or created a sense of community and camaraderie and all that.
Yeah, definitely. And I attended some printmaking symposiums. So we hosted one at McNeese where students and instructors from other schools in Louisiana came, and we sort of traded off each year the location of the print thing, which is what we called it. And so we had one at McNeese, and that was a lot of fun. We did some blacklight screen printing and sheen clay, all these different demos and little mini workshops. And then we had another one where we went to I think it was Louisiana Tech in Ruston, Louisiana. And we did steamroller prints. So we're carving these huge blocks of wood, and we'd ink them in teams with these huge rollers. And then one of the professors from UL just drove over them. We laid canvas on top after they're inked and laying in the parking lot, and we just drove that steamroller right over them, and we had all these like giant tapestry sized prints. It was a lot of fun.
Wow, yeah, the reveal had to be something, because I always remember how I had to take a deep breath and my heart would stop, because that was my unofficial minor, was printmaking. And the way I was taught at SMU was you're not done until you burn right through the plate, you know. And of course, that was one concept, and the other concept was the velvety acquaintance, you know.
Yeah.
But the facilities that you have at CVPA downtown, College of Visual and Performing Arts downtown, which CVPA didn't exist. We were still an art department when I left there. We had no ventilation, so there were
Oh,
open acid baths. The biggest fear was that some fool would throw a penny in there, but then again, the fool would have to know that that would create a reaction, so they really weren't a fool, just a foolish person.
yeah.
And then we had these big bins of kerosene soaked wood shavings to
Oh my
clean
gosh.
the ground off of the plates. And everybody smoked back then. So you can only
Oh
imagine
yeah.
if your butt fell into the wood shavings, the place would go up like a bomb. But
Yeah.
it was a whole nother world. Uh,
Yeah. It's definitely changed a lot as far as like shifting to, or finding more and more about what chemicals are toxic and dangerous, and finding alternatives and sort of shifting to those less dangerous alternatives.
right, right. You mentioned the print thing, and one of the discussions that I've had, and they've become rather heated and rather passionate, let's put it that way, is these days, when you say a print, it's a very wide field, because a dyed-in-the-wool printmaker has their skin crawl when they hear the term giclée, you know,
Yeah.
uh, which is just basically French for inkjet print.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no process whatsoever. And that's one issue, where, you have the traditionalists who say that that's just not print. And I've had a conversation with someone where I tried to explain to them that in Europe, what they consider a fine art reproduction is a serigraph, which is just the more proper term for silk screen.
hmm
And I know that they sort of like wrinkle their noses when they see a giclée. Have you run into
Yeah.
any of that?
Um, Honestly, I feel like I've met a lot of people who don't really know much about printmaking or what it entails. A lot of people outside of our little niche arts community
Mhm.
will see a Japanese woodblock print like hakusei and think that it's a painting. I've had my prints called paintings many times, and it doesn't bother me, but so I think that's like one aspect of it, is that like not a whole lot of people even know to think about these things and have these debates. Um, but of course, like in the art world, these are things that we think about and we critique, and I think it's a very interesting conversation when it comes to printmaking, because printmaking in its conception was invented to make things accessible, to make things cheap and available to a wide audience, to spread text and literature and images, artwork all over the world. And you didn't just have to be rich to have access to these things anymore. And I think that's really a cool thing to keep in mind when you're making fine art prints, is that now we can have glisse, we can have digital prints, to do that where necessary. um, but it's sort of like how photography opened up possibilities for painters to not just be painting you know something representationally, but because they want to make it art and make it interesting. So I kind of think that frees us up to really experiment and like do some weird things, because we don't have to just do it for the sake of reproduction anymore. We're doing it for the sake of art.
Exactly. So it has, I mean, because right now, the world is divided about AI, which is another
Oh, right.
subject, but we'll get to that maybe if I remember. But the whole thing about the print versus print making comes on the purchase side, and you said it very well. Most people aren't aware of the terminology. They have no idea what they're purchasing. They like it and it's reasonable and they buy it. And yes, when uh, copperplate specifically came out, there was 100 guilder print. It gave poor old Rembrandt an avenue to sell something for a smaller price more frequently. So in other words, he probably made more money selling prints than he ever did selling paintings.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that actually, because I'm a big fan of Rembrandt's etchings, and I think that's something that, not everyone knows about, but they're tiny, tiny little things. I saw an exhibition once actually in Lake Charles. It was an exhibition of just Rembrandt prints, and there were magnifying glasses to look at them because they're so, small and finely detailed, but it had that sort of same feeling and styles of Rembrandt painting, these large and very expensive paintings, but they're accessible, and it's still a Rembrandt. He still had this incredible knack for capturing like just the right amount of information to make it both
That gesture,
interesting and compelling. Yeah, very
gesture and
gestural.
atmosphere. Which
Yes.
is, what was so phenomenal. But on the purchase / investment side, as a printmaker, intaglio, dry point, anything that requires a press and a blanket and a heavy roller to go over. As you know, if you were doing an edition of 100, that you have the beginning, the middle, and the end of the run. And the prices, well, there'd be some debate there as well, but the price theoretically, if you priced each one of those prints at say $50, okay, so it's 50 times 100, but the value now of the prints on resale, secondary market, is the first impressions are the most valuable because the plate has not broken down yet. And then the middle batch goes into the second category of value, and then the end of the run goes probably into the lowest, because by that point the plate has broken down. So if you take the first print and the 100th print, they really don't look the same because of the pressure, of that roller going over it, especially with dry point, because the copper's soft and it starts to collapse, right? And then, of course, there's the consistency of inking, where not only is there a skill, an artistic skill in creating the image, but there's also an artisanal skill in inking.
Yes.
There are people who wipe very well, and there are people who don't wipe very well, right?
Yeah.
And so you have all these things involved. Now, we fast forward to this digital age, and whether it's the first print, the 100th print, or the 1 millionth print, they're all going to look pretty much the same, unless, of course, the tanks on the printer are starting to run dry.
Yeah.
So for secondary market, and then there's always that, back in the day, you would strike the plate, meaning once you did that run, you would just get, your all, and you would just make a big scratch or an X through it, or you would just, bend it or fold it, whatever, to protect the integrity of the run and of all the images that you produced.
Yes.
No, not anymore, right?
Yeah, it's really an interesting conversation. Thinking of value when it comes to editions. I love whenever someone buys a print from me and they want one that has an inconsistency, or they want one that's a certain number in the edition, because immediately I'm like, oh, this person knows what they're getting into. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a funny concept. The scarcity making it more and more valuable, and you can, use that to your advantage if you want to make something that is perceived as more valuable and expensive,
Hmm.
or if you, want it to be accessible and, free to the public, you can print digitally. Like there's all these different options out there depending on what your goal is. I really like this story. I can't remember where it came from, but it's about a book collector, and he has one of two copies of a certain book in the entire world. And he spends all his life looking for that second copy because he so badly wants to own both of them. And finally, as an old man, he gets that second copy, and he immediately throws it in the fireplace because he has the only copy now, and it's worth so much more.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, what? Yeah, it's weird how that is. So let's now fast forward to digital, because now we have, and not, in fact, I'd love to be able to speak with like Dina Hayden or something at the Co-Creative Center to have a seminar where we have secondary market expert, a dealer, and somebody else, probably three people, each one well-versed in their specific field in prints, because we can't say printmaking because obviously that sort of segregates, but to really explain all of this, because sometimes I think it's really not getting through in education, in programs. But going to digital prints, the word giclée now has been dropped, or the term giclée now has been dropped or substituted with archival prints, I think it is.
Yeah, sometimes I see archival inkjet print even.
Right.
Yeah, I think, there's nothing wrong with displaying something that was printed digitally, or selling it. But yeah, it is interesting. It's funny too how you can sort of make things sound fancier by like giving them a certain name on the label. Seriography versus silk screen versus screen printing.
Exactly.
Archival print versus sorry.
No, not a problem.
Archival
I know
print
your
display
I can
versus,
see your
yeah.
brain is like, it's like rabbits in the backyard over here, like
Yeah.
scattering all of you, trying to gather them up in your head. But so you've got that now. So basically, we've got a print, okay, of a painting, and there's two choices. One is that you could have your signature digitally embedded, on in the process. Or you can have it printed and just sign your name and a date, no addition, no folio, nothing. Okay. And then the next, another category that seems to be gathering a bit of steam is art posters, where it would have your image and it would say Taylor Hickey, and it would say, whatever, if this was part of a series, this is the Lancelot series of paintings, and it would be all in type, and then it would have the dates, and it's a poster. Or you could even have a poster of an exhibit that you've participated in a solo exhibit at a gallery or whatever. That is also a saleable item. And then we go into edition prints, and that's where the secondary market people specifically get a little bug-eyed, because they don't trust the artist to say, okay, you said this is 1 of 25.
Yeah.
Okay. I walked into this place and I saw the exact same image, which was now 1 of 100.
Yeah.
And you didn't put down, Roman numeral 1 for the 25 edition, and you didn't put down Roman numeral 2 for the 100 edition.
Yeah.
So it's like the Wild West out there. And at the end of the day, it's an inkjet print on acid-free paper. What do you think about all that? And as a traditional printmaker, how does that make you feel?
Ooh. I really like that example that you brought up. of an artist making an edition of 25 and not putting that Roman numeral I to indicate that it's the first edition of another, however many editions of the same print. And yeah, it goes back to that, idea of scarcity affecting value. And, that can be true whether it's a digital print or whether it's a fine art print like a lithograph or a relief print. And I think artists, should be careful to be upfront and truthful. But at the same time, like when you're making art, a lot of times you're making it for yourself as much as, to sell or for an audience. And so, that might not come to mind. I'm not really, I don't feel threatened by the presence of digital art prints being sold, art posters. I do think it's really cool when, they are editioned in the same tradition as printmaking, fine art printmaking, where you sort of have the artist signature on the bottom right hand side, the edition in the center. This is 4 out of 100, or this is the second edition, 25 out of 100, and then you've got the title over on the left. I think it's nice information to have, from the standpoint of someone who likes art, someone who buys art, or even an archivist. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, but it's still, I'm thinking now of, in the future, because the Artist Index is about the present. Obviously, we're also trying to get record and document artists of the past through friends, relatives, family. But then if you fast forward to the future, which is tomorrow, you've got these prints, and again, I wonder about resale, because one of those things. I remember Titus Kaphar did it was a documentary film. It was a documentary film on Titus Kaphar, who has become world famous, like in a couple of heartbeats. He now has an institution out in New London, Connecticut called Next Haven, in New Haven, Connecticut called Next Haven. And they were kind of shooting it from the hip, and his friend and almost constant companion said, "Hey, Sotheby's just sold one of your pieces for $1.2 billion. And Titus Kaphar, the artist, the painter, looks at him and said, I don't see a dime of that money." It's like, well, what do you mean? The guy who bought that painting from me is going to see all that money. Yeah. So there's that weird disconnect. The state of California tried to make sure that the artist was getting a percentage, or, in perpetuity. In other words, for every sale, the name was not only attached, but the residuals went to the artist directly, or to the artist's estate or the family, whatever. Mm-hmm. Now with prints, when you've got these prints, if you've never created anything but sheet clay prints, even though they're well created, we are fortunate in New Bedford to have Tricolor up on Ashley Boulevard. They do a phenomenal work, the digital scanning and so on and so forth. But really, at the end of the day, if you spent, so let's say $150 would be a reasonable price for a print, ready to frame. Secondary market, and this is where I'm not versed well enough in it, is it less? Have you ever watched the Antique Roadshow? And they did something from like 2017, and it's like they run it and it's $5,000. And now today in 2023, they put down what the valuation is, and you hear, wah, wah. It goes down, right? So I'm wondering about the these digital prints. If the same thing is, it's like, it's it's ink and paper. Unless they, for some weird reason, the 100 copies of that particular painting, signed by the artist, dated, the whole, titles, the whole 9 yards, unless people just threw them away or they got misplaced or whatever, that's about, like you said, scarcity. The value would only be, it's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very subjective.
Now, in the case of an artist having images of their work and the original work was stolen, and these are the only records of that work,
Mm-hmm.
I'm now wondering, does that change the game a little bit?
Yeah, because it's like striking the block.
So what projects are you working on now, and what pie in the sky, big highfalutin ideas do you have for projects?
So lately, most of my work has been three-dimensional objects made out of prints. So, I have these relief prints, mostly lino cuts that, I carved. A lot of them have celestial imagery, moons of different planets in the solar system, different nebula images from the Hubble Space Telescope or the James Webb Space Telescope, that I kind of use as inspiration, but then also shoot from the hip a little bit and sort of let the process of carving sort of give it its own identity, its own sense of mark making. But I take those prints and I cut them up into paper templates and make polyhedrons out of them. And when I was at UMass, I started incorporating LED lights and some installation work with these. So they're essentially like geometric star lanterns. I cut these little holes. Originally, I was doing them by hand with a little utility knife, cutting these little holes that sort of follow the patterns on the prints and allow the light to shine through in a way that it almost tricks your eye a little bit. So you're like, is that a reflection? Why is it like shimmering like that? But it's just this light sort of coming from within, and it comes through the paper, but then where those little holes are, it shines out more brightly. And I could set these LEDs to sort of go on and off, fade in and out at different intervals. And my MFA thesis show involved an installation in Gallery 244, which is it's about a 16-foot square white cube gallery at the UMass Star Store. And I essentially blacked it out with like curtains and black paint and suspended all these sculptures. And they're different scales. Some could fit in the palm of your hand and some were about 3 or 4 feet in diameter. I had the means to work larger then and there in that space. So, I
take advantage.
right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. But, now that I'm no longer in school, I share an apartment. I share a studio at Hatch Street with 4 other artists. And so I don't have as much space to keep making things of that scale, but I still enjoy making those that, can fit in the palm of your hand. I think there's a nice intimacy to that and a nice feeling to it. I also really like artist books. And so I make books that are sort of also sculptural forms. That's something that I got into in undergrad. My professor, Heather Ryan Kelly, got me into it. She was teaching bookmaking classes in addition to her painting classes. And I took 2 of those. And that was when I sort of started using prints that I had made that I wasn't totally happy with. I hadn't quite inked them enough in one spot, or they're a little over inked and muddy in another spot. So, they don't fit in perfectly with the rest of the edition.
Mhm.
Why not make something else out of it and give it a new life? And
So they're like BATs.
What's that?
BATs, batatea. You know, it doesn't make it into the edition. It's almost like a make ready, but I believe it was called BAT or batatea, which is French to throw it on the ground. So
Oh, okay. I hadn't
yeah,
heard that. I
yeah,
like that.
and I mean, there's a couple of other categories too in printmaking, which was, you know, it was really well, you know, traditional printmaking was really well regulated. Let's call it that way. So much so that in some cases where in an edition, the primary numbered pieces disappeared or were destroyed or whatever, all of a sudden, or there were people who placed a high value on the APs or the BATs.
Yeah, artist proof. Yeah.
Because it showed process and progressiveness, you know, going through that. Real quick, did you ever run across an instructor named Jerry Barnard down there?
No.
Okay, I had a composition teacher who was from LSU, and I figured, you know, he probably like rattled around down in Louisiana, being from down there, and he was a guy who taught me a super valuable lesson, but that's for another time. When you were talking about your dimensional pieces, two things popped into my head. One of them I don't actually really like to see, but one of the things that snapped in my mind was Chinese lanterns, where you've got these prints, you know, and you know they have these little rigs where you can. It's almost like the chafing dish candle. You light it up, and you know you have all these, like the paper bag, you know, the Chinese things, just floating. Luminaria. Unless luminaria are the ones that you put sand on the bottom and put them on the ground. But anyway, these things just rising all about with your imagery. I think it would be so cool.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I definitely want to keep experimenting with them and trying some different things. I recently took a class at the Steel Yard in Providence, and I learned to make a little geometric box out of steel, which was really exciting. It was my first time ever welding or doing anything like that. And you know, that's a very different material that allows for different things like outdoor sculpture. You know, that could be a possibility one day.
And lino cuts, that's another one before I forget. Is it my imagination, or has lino cut made a comeback, a big comeback? There's been a resurgence.
It has, yeah. I feel like you know, with social media and things like Instagram and TikTok, artists are, you know, probably for better and for worse, artists are feeling like they want to or need to show process and show their work, and it's a very process oriented medium, and it's very fun and like cathartic as well. You know, you don't have to be a career artist to want to carve a little handmade stamp for your letters, or you know, just for fun to like make postcards to give to your friends. It's really an interesting and versatile medium, and I think that it started to kind of pick up steam outside of institutions.
And again, I guess it's relatively inexpensive comparative. You don't need a press. You don't need all those other accoutrements, you know, to accoutrement. You don't need all those things.
Spoon.
Just a wooden spoon, basically, and you're going. And you know, anybody with a I guess a mechanical enough mind can create their own registration system, so you can have multicolor liner prints.
Yeah.
And there are also the hand colored liner prints as well, right?
Yeah. I've also seen a lot of people doing those sort of puzzle piece lino blocks as well, where you one into different shapes so you can ink them separately in different colors, you know, maybe some gradient rolls, and put them all together so you have this image made from one block, but you can separate pieces and then put it back together to print it.
I think in this day of instant gratification, instant anything, that's kind of cool because it really does show hand skill, which unfortunately is lacking. And if you speak to any college art professor who's at an institution where they're phasing out drawing, why?
Yeah.
But anyway, I know this one place that went from 11 sections to 2. They will
Yeah.
remain unnamed. But again, and with lino cutting, it's that positive, negative, it's composition. There's a lot of thought process that goes into it. Hey, I'm a former abstract painter, and most people think, we just throw stuff at it or find weird things to apply paint with, and there's no thought. It's all chance.
No, but you have observational skills, and you have
Right.
you have thoughts when it comes to composition and color and all
Right.
these elements of design.
But whereas with printmaking, it's from the first, the initial sketch all the way through to that first pull. It's this incredible necklace of process. I say
Yeah.
necklace versus chain because
Yeah, a whole ball and chain.
exactly.
No, but yeah, it is. It's sort of like a lot of smaller processes put together to make the entirety of the process of making a print, and it's so different depending on what you're doing, what you're using. Every printmaker has their own sort of nuances and things they've picked up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more you do, the more you learn, the more you apply. It's perpetual. What about gel printing? That seems to be a brand new thing, and I'm still sort of puzzled by that. Can you do multiples, or is it pretty much they're just monos? Or once you have that initial image transferred, can you
in
do
my
multiples?
experience, they're mostly for mono types and mono prints. So you could have your jelly plate and you roll it up with ink, and you use leaves or pieces of paper or string or whatever it is to sort of block out that ink, pick up that ink and create your image. And you can print that once on a piece of paper, and then without re-inking it, you could print it again for a ghost print, that lighter, more faded version of the original, but they're still going to be very different. And yeah, you might get a few of those, but other than that, they're all going to be a bit different. It's not like a copper or zinc plate where you have that image that's going to last for 100 or 200 prints.
Now, can you start that process all over again? What is it? You ink up the gel block, transfer the image, ink it up again, and then you pull your print, and then you wash it and then do it again. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Registration's got to be a party, but I'm sure you could figure it out.
You may be right. I'm personally not really an expert on the jelly prints. I tried it in undergrad in a workshop, but it's not something I've done in a long time.
Is it the printmaker's version of pouring, to painters? The whole thing of pouring, it's just...
Yeah. I don't know if I would say that. In a way, it reminds me a little bit of things like cyanotypes, but I mean, obviously it's very different, and it's another one of those that is kind of taken off outside of institutions. I think, a lot of school teachers really like the jelly printing. People who teach younger students or like more casual students tend to like it. But it can also be very artful. And I guess the reason it reminds me a little bit of like cyanotype or those other photo-based processes is because you can use all of these, everyday objects like string and leaves and flowers and things like that to sort of create your image without drawing it or, blocking it out with asphaltum and all these other like
I mean,
very
well,
specific.
and then you flashed on one of my favorite things. Once I discovered collagraphs, I was like totally hooked. But the huge challenge of collagraphs is not creating the plate using strings and all kinds of things, and then gessoing it and getting it prepped so that you can apply ink and then pull it off. And there's where the patience comes in, is pulling off that ink. Because you've got this very irregular surface. It's almost like trying to wipe off a cat's tongue. And especially when you do it with cheesecloth, right? Was that?
Yeah, similar to intaglio in that way, that the wiping of the excess ink takes patience, and it takes practice to become more skilled and more consistent at it.
And then of course the crush, because once you hit that certain level, it's gotten crushed to as much as it's going to get crushed. It's almost like Popeye. I've been crushed till all I can be crushed till I can't be crushed no more. You know what I mean? So now obviously the beginning of your run and the end of your run are going to be, actually the beginning, middle, and end are going to be really, really separate. But I guess that's what was sort of cool about the collograph. I mean, you knew what you were up against, but you're still doing it anyway. And again, I think that's the whole thing about, I think, printmaking versus painting. For me, the painting was very serious. But the printmaking was a different level of seriousness. There was a technical aspect to it. There was a traditional, not that these things don't exist in painting, but there was just something regimented. And I guess being a Virgo OCD, it really, if I had the money right now and the space, I'd get a press.
I'll go in with you.
Oh yeah. In fact, that was one of my next questions. What's the probability of starting a print co-op? We don't have one. Now we've got, finally, after years and years and years, we have figure drawing. I almost call it a figure drawing co-op that, Kat Knudsen's been running, right? But we need a print co-op. I don't know what the heck the real the old-fashioned traditional name for that is, but basically you rent the press time. You got your prep area, you got your print area,
Yeah, I mean, there's things like AS220 in Providence, but I would love to see New Bedford have their own.
That's a good grant project.
Yeah. I was just thinking that sounds like something one of those New Bedford creative grants might be perfect for.
Yeah. How much is a press going for now?
There's really a range.
There's also a secondary market too. I mean, people thought it would be a really cool thing. It's like, oh, what the hell did I do?
Yeah, you might be able to find a decently sized etching press, which would be very large and very heavy, used for between $1,000 and $2,000. But there's I mean, there's other things going around, book presses. I think Blick sells a small sort of book press. And I wish I could remember the name, but my mentor, Adrian Teo, who's my advisor at UMass, he has this little tiny 3D printed press. And I wish I could remember the company's name or the organization's name that is making them, but they 3D print the little press bed, and it just clips onto your desk, like the side of your table. And it's got a little steel roller, but you can make like stamp sized relief and etching prints on it.
Really?
Bitty ones. Yeah. And I want to say, I remember they were like pretty affordable, and they had sort of like a sliding scale model for charging for them. Wow. I'll have to look that up and get back to you.
We've got a lot of great artisans around here too. I mean, because of industry, fishing and so on and so forth, welders and fabricators. I'm almost wondering now, wow, hey, buddy, how much would you check out this drawing? How much would it cost to do one of these? But hey,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, the time has flown by. We're gonna have to wrap
It
this
has.
up. Parting words, parting thoughts. Don't forget, this is, and not to wig you out right now, but this is a document of this portion of your life right now. This is going into the database at the Whaling Museum, like all the other podcasts, so that in the future somebody's going to say, "Hey, I got this print by Taylor Hickey, and I got a hit from a Whaling Museum, and wow, there was a podcast. So now, wow, you never know, right?"
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a interdisciplinary visual artist. I say that's kind of what I call myself, because I don't really pigeonhole myself as being a printmaker or a sculptor. I do also like to paint and draw sometimes, and try a little bit of everything. And living and working in New Bedford, I've really enjoyed my time here and like come to call this place home. And that's not to say that I'm not interested in traveling and seeing other parts of the world as well. But I'm happy to be here doing what I'm doing, and I'm grateful to be included on your podcast.
You're welcome.
Coming up, I have this summer I'm teaching a drawing class at RISD, and in the fall I've got an artist residency at the New Bedford National Whaling Historic Park.
Excellent.
Which I'm very excited for. They have a maker space with some fun equipment that I'm really looking forward to using, and making some new work and involving the community. And very much looking forward to that. And you can find me at Taylor Hickey Art on Instagram. My website is taylorhickeyart.com. And my email is taylorhickeyart@gmail.com. It's all pretty much the same thing. So, if you're ever interested in looking into more about my artwork, that's where you can find me right now.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and you have been a great addition to the, you are part of the creative community, but you also are a visible part of the creative community. Taylor's also, along with Devin McLaughlin, is they're the co-hosts, let's call it that, of the New Bedford Light Fine Arts Club, which is still in its infancy. They've done a great job doing that, and what it really comes down to is that an artist in isolation is no longer necessary. We have a very vibrant community here, and it's vibrant because of people like you.
Thank you. Yeah,
You're welcome.
I love the arts community here, and I think it is uniquely vibrant, and it really fosters that sense of community.
Great. Well, folks, that wraps up another episode of the Artist Index with Taylor Hickey, and I'm your host, Ron Fortier, and we'll see you the next time on the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artist Index or the South Coast Artist Index. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.